back to PMAT Live. If you watch the first part of the video series on how to make bread, you'll know that the whole point of this endeavor is to do it very stress-free and to try and show you not so much how to follow the recipe exactly, but what the dough should look and feel like when you've got it right. Because I think that that's a lot of times where cookbooks tend to fall down on the job. They don't really explain and show you exactly what your dough should look like. Therefore, we're all lost wondering, is it too wet, is it too dry, is it stretchy enough, blah, blah, blah. So let's get started with this. We're making classic sandwich loaf from the King Arthur flour website. There are 4 basic ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast. We have those 4, and in addition, part of our liquid is going to come from some whole milk, and that's going to introduce a little bit of lactose, which is the milk sugar. Yeast doesn't like to eat lactose, so therefore it's going to sweeten our bread a little bit because the yeast is going to leave the sugar alone and not eat it. Also, there's going to be some melted butter in it, and that's just going to give us some fat, which adds a little bit of flavor and a little bit of tenderness to the bread. Since it's sandwich bread, we're not really looking for that really chewy artisan loaf because you don't want all of your sandwich fillings to squish out the sides when you take a bite. So the butter is going to help to tenderize it a little bit. And the part of the sugar will be played by honey today. The original recipe calls for sugar, but I like honey. It is hygroscopic like sugar, which means it's going to draw some moisture to it and it's going to improve the keeping quality of the bread. And also it's going to give some complex flavors to the bread, and the yeast is going to enjoy eating it. So there we go. This is a straight dough method. So all we're going to do is throw all of the ingredients into the mixer. The only caveat with that is we're going to withhold the water, put everything else together, and then add water until the dough is the consistency we want. Now, you're not going to be seeing much of me the rest of this video because I'm not the important part. The important part is looking at the dough. So pretty much from now on, you'll just be hearing me and the drone of the mixer and watching the dough. Hopefully this will be helpful, and I'd love to hear your feedback, so let me know what you think. All right, here we go. Ragged, not sticky at all, which is not good. We want it to be pretty wet. It kind of feels like mostly dried out Play-Doh before it gets to the point where it gets really, really hard, but you can't really roll it into a ball anymore. That's what this feels like. I hope you can see down in there. It's pretty sloppy looking now. It's pretty wet. The dough is pretty soft, not very stretchy because look, it pulls apart easily. It's also not very smooth. Can you see kind of how bumpy the dough is? Okay, so we're going to let this knead for, let's say, roughly 7 minutes, and see how it is. See, the dough is smoother. It's not perfectly smooth. Do you hear that? My thumb is barely sticking. Now the big test, they a lot of times will tell you in cookbooks that the big test of whether or not your dough is ready is if the dough is all wrapped around the dough hook, but that's not necessarily the best way. The best way is to just check for yourself. I'm going to take a little piece of dough, stretch it out, hold it up to the light. If you can see light through it before it starts to tear, then you're in pretty good shape. I'm not sure that I am in love with this yet. I feel like the gluten can develop a bit more. And stick it back in for a couple of minutes. And check our dough again. Not sticky. Very stretchy. Check it out. It even springs back. It's because we've developed a lot of that elastic gluten. My little ball of dough. Cutting it out, stretching it. Very stretchy. Can you guys see that? See my finger moving back there? Nice, perfect. That's what we want. Okay, so now that we have our beautiful dough, what we need to do is let it rise, give the yeast a chance to eat their fill of all of those sugars, make a bunch of carbon dioxide, and expand the little bubbles that are already in our dough. So if you'll see, I'm just shaping it, pulling it all together on one side. So I've stretched basically a membrane of gluten around the top of my ball, and now I'm going to tighten that up by sort of shoving it around on the counter. Now we do that because we want it to be nice and tight so the yeast can expand the dough equally in all directions. And since our bowl is so clean, we can use it for our dough to rise in. A little pan spray. Put my dough in, ugly side down. A little more pan spray. You can use oil, butter, whatever. The idea with the pan spray is to keep a skin from forming on the outside of your ball of dough, because if it does, your dough is not going to rise. So we're going to keep the outside of it lubricated, cover it with a nice towel, and walk away from it and let it rise. I'm going to check it after an hour, and we'll see how it looks, and we'll just go from there. Alright, so that's pretty much it for part 2. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in just a bit. Bye-bye.